Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, we're drifting off to the soothing sounds of screaming crowds, clashing steel, and lightly oiled men stabbing each other for rent money. That's right, we're talking about Roman gladiators. You've seen the dramatised versions, slow-motion duels in sunlit arenas, noble warriors saluting emperors, a tear rolling down someone's cheek as they fall in glorious battle. This is not that story. This is the version where you wake up in chains, train until your bones hurt, and then possibly die face down in sand while a drunk senator places bets on how long your leg twitches. So before we step into the arena, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if falling asleep to tales of organised violence, state-sponsored trauma, and first-century dental care is your thing. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all losing sleep together. Now settle in, let your body relax, and ignore the fact that you're about to become Rome's favourite meat-based entertainment. Because tonight, you're a gladiator, and your odds are worse than you think. There's a moment, a very specific moment, when your freedom ends. You don't realise it right away. Maybe it's when you lose the battle, or when the debt collector shows up with soldiers instead of paperwork. Maybe it's when you wake up chained to 5 other men in the back of a cart that smells like horses and panic. Whenever it happens, the result is the same. You stop being a person and you start being a product. A thing to be sold, trained, displayed, and ideally killed in a manner that pleases a few thousand bored Romans with a flair for the dramatic. It doesn't matter who you were before. A farmer, a rebel, a bandit, a disgraced soldier, a Gaul who zigged when he should have zagged, a Greek who lost the wrong war, a North African with the misfortune of being born near a Roman outpost. You're here now, on the losing end of the Roman economy. Congratulations. You've just joined the supply chain of human suffering that fuels the empire's favourite blood sport. Rome gets its gladiators from a variety of sources, most of which involve people losing something, a battle, a bet, or just the will to keep breathing. Prisoners of war are common. Rome loves a good conquest, and every conquest comes with its own buffet of broken survivors. You were probably herded like livestock after your side surrendered, branded somewhere unspeakable, and marched to the nearest slave market with just enough water to survive and not enough to complain. Criminals are another fine source, not the clever ones. Rome doesn't catch those. No, it's the thieves, the arsonists, and the political dissidents that fill the roster. And if you weren't technically guilty of anything, well, the paperwork can be flexible. Then there are the damnati ad ludum, those sentenced specifically to the gladiator schools as punishment. Maybe you stole from a senator. Maybe you insulted a statue. Maybe someone just didn't like your face. The point is the court saw potential in your suffering. Not enough to rehabilitate you, just enough to turn your body into a form of live entertainment. It's kind of like being given a job in reality television, except you're not allowed to quit, and the losing contestant dies screaming. Your first real experience of this life comes at the slave market. It's not subtle. You're lined up, stripped down, and inspected like overripe fruit. Buyers prod your muscles, check your teeth, and poke old wounds to see if they'll open. One guy tries to guess your age by smelling your hair. Another asks how many times you've been stabbed. You don't speak Latin, but you understand the tone. You're being priced. Your worth is measured not in dignity, but in potential blood volume. Eventually, someone buys you, or more precisely, they buy your future pain. This someone is usually a lanista, a man who runs a ludus, which is not a school so much as a prison, with gym equipment, where men are trained to kill and die for the entertainment of others. He sizes you up with the casual coldness of a man who has ordered 100 like you before. He pays in denarii and you're not sure how much. Enough to make your humiliation worthwhile, not enough to suggest you'll be missed. You're chained to the others, and the journey begins. It doesn't matter if the ludus is in Capua, Pompeii, or Rome itself. The trip is long, uncomfortable, and full of reminders that you are not a traveller. You are cargo. You sleep on the ground. You eat from wooden bowls filled with lukewarm porridge and regret. You're lucky if you're allowed to walk. You're luckier if no one dies en route. One man does. An old German who coughs blood and collapses by a roadside shrine. The guards don't stop. The crows do. You arrive at the training school at dawn because of course you do. The gates open like a mouth, wide and yawning, and you're marched in with no fanfare and even less explanation. The air inside the ludus smells like sweat, rust, and fear. You hear clashing wood, grunts of effort, the sharp bark of commands. There are men sparring with wooden swords heavier than iron ones, and others kneeling on the ground. Too injured to stand, but not injured enough to be excused. No one looks up as you pass. You're not special, just new. The lanista greets you personally. That is to say, he gestures vaguely while his assistants shove you into a row. You're counted, catalogued, and told what you'll be called from now on. A name chosen for dramatic effect, something Latin and ridiculous, designed more for cheering crowds than human dignity. Your real name isn't important anymore. It won't be used, not even when you die. Later you're led to your cell. It's not large, but then neither are you at this point. A straw mat, a clay jug, a crack in the wall for light. The bars are thick because hope is surprisingly strong when you've got nothing left. You sit, you breathe. You wonder if this is a nightmare. It isn't. It's your new life, and it comes with a training schedule, a diet plan, and an expiration date. That night, you lie awake on your mat, listening to the quiet thud of fists hitting flesh in the next courtyard. Someone's still sparring, or maybe fighting for real. Maybe this place doesn't sleep. Maybe you won't either. It's strange, you thought losing your freedom would feel louder. But it doesn't. It feels quiet, cold, like waiting for something you know won't be good. Tomorrow, the training begins. And when it does, you'll learn that pain isn't the worst part. The worst part is how quickly you get used to it. The gates close behind you with a sound that suggests permanence. Not like a door swinging shut, more like a verdict. The Ludus, the Gladiator training school, is not a place of learning. Not really. It's a compound. A prison disguised as a gym. A factory where men are broken and rebuilt into crowd-pleasing weapons. The word ludus technically means school in Latin, but there are no books, no teachers, and certainly no graduations. Just sand, sweat, and a rotating cast of half-dead students who can't leave. You shuffle into the courtyard with the others, flanked by guards whose expressions fall somewhere between boredom and practiced cruelty. The sun is already high, turning the gravel beneath your feet into a slow-cooking pan. Around you, men are training, swinging wooden swords, dodging lunges, taking hits. The wood cracks against muscle with the unmistakable sound of something that hurts but doesn't kill. Not yet. Their bodies are scarred, sun-darkened and lean with the kind of muscle you earn from necessity, not vanity. None of them look at you. New meat isn't worth the attention. The man in charge of all this is the lanista, your new owner, employer, and occasional executioner, depending on how things go. He's not dressed like a soldier. He doesn't have to be. His weapon is paperwork, and his power comes from owning the people with actual swords. He stands at the edge of the training yard with a short staff, gesturing occasionally, but mostly letting his instructors handle the violence. You don't talk to him, not directly. You're not important enough. You're handled by assistants, men who once fought in the arena and now train others to do the same, because they survived just long enough to be useful in a new way. You're inspected again, this time by someone who's less interested in buying and more interested in breaking you in. They check your joints, your stance, your teeth, and your balance. They weigh you, make you walk, strip you naked again, because apparently there's no situation the Romans don't think can be improved by public nudity. There are remarks you don't understand. Laughter, you definitely do. And finally, a nod. You're deemed usable. That's the closest thing to praise you'll get for a while. Once evaluated, you're assigned a cell. It's small, barely enough room to lie flat. The walls are stone, the door is barred, and the bedding is a thin mat that smells like the last man who slept on it. There's a clay jug for water, a bucket for everything else, and a single slit in the wall that offers light but no view. Privacy is a forgotten luxury. Dignity, an inside joke. At night, you can hear the coughing, the snoring, the muttered prayers, and the occasional sound of someone vomiting quietly into straw. Every morning begins the same way, with shouting. You're woken before sunrise, marched into the yard, and assigned your weapon. Not a real one yet, that comes later. You start with the rudies, a wooden practice sword, heavier than it looks, and shaped less for elegance and more for bruising. It's not designed to kill, but that doesn't mean it can't. Plenty of men don't make it past training, and when they die, there's no ceremony. Just silence, a quick removal, and a new name on the schedule. Training is relentless. You drill for hours in the heat, swinging your sword at wooden posts called palus, meant to simulate an opponent's torso. You repeat the same combinations over and over, until your arms feel like they're filled with boiling lead. You learn to step, pivot, block, strike, not just for survival, but for style. Gladiator fights aren't just battles, they're performances. The crowd wants flair, not flinching. You're trained to die gracefully, or if you're lucky, to kill beautifully. The instructors aren't kind. That's not their job. They yell, shove, and strike without warning. One smacks you across the back with a wooden staff when your stance is wrong. Another grabs your jaw and jerks your head to make you see properly. Pain is constant. Not just the pain of exertion, but the deeper ache of transformation. The slow process of becoming something you never wanted to be. You started as a human. You're being reshaped into content. There's no real camaraderie here, not yet. The other men are wary of you. You're a potential opponent, not a friend. Some are seasoned veterans, known as veterani, who have survived multiple fights and earned a sliver of respect. Others are just like you, fresh, confused, and already questioning the wisdom of staying alive this long. No one trusts each other. Why would they? You might be stabbing each other next week for the amusement of strangers with wine and cushions. Your diet is surprisingly generous, which is suspicious. You're fed a steady stream of barley, legumes, dried fruits, and water, all designed to bulk you up and keep you alive just long enough to bleed convincingly. The Roman public prefers their gladiators thick, not lean like soldiers, but solid like meat. Extra fat protects vital organs, and there's nothing more disappointing to a Roman crowd than a quick, unimpressive kill. They want spectacle, they want drama, and fat bleeds better. Every few days, new men arrive. Some cry, some yell, some go quiet. You learn not to look too closely. Attachment is dangerous. It's easier to survive when no one around you has a name. That's probably why the Lanista gives you stage names. Something flashy and theatrical like Vindex or Tigris. Names that look good on a poster or scratched onto the wall of a bathhouse. Your real name fades quietly, like everything else that used to make you a person. At night, you ache in places you didn't know could ache. You lie on your mat and stare at the ceiling, wondering how many weeks you've been here. The days blur together. The sun rises, the shouting begins, the pain continues. Sometimes you hear the cheers from a distant arena, another ludus, or maybe an execution, and you realise that one day soon, those cheers will be for you, or at you, or because of you. It's hard to tell the difference, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you change. Your hands harden, your reflexes sharpen. Your fear doesn't vanish, it just becomes routine. You stop flinching when someone yells. You start to recognise the difference between a wound that's painful and one that's fatal. You begin to understand what the lanista meant when he said, "Some of you will die. The rest of you will wish you had." This is the ludus. It's not home, it's not prison, it's purgatory, a waiting room for death, where the walls echo with ambition, desperation, and the quiet thump of men becoming monsters for an audience that will never know their names. There's no such thing as a rest day in the ludus, not unless you count the hours you spend unconscious and drooling onto a mat that smells like sweat and regret. From the moment the sun peeks over the stone walls, your day begins with the clatter of sandals and the crack of a staff against the nearest solid object, occasionally a post, sometimes a person. You wake up sore and you go to sleep sorer. Every part of your body aches, even the parts you weren't aware had nerve endings. The first thing you learn is that everything in this place is designed to hurt you, but only just enough to keep you alive. Training is relentless and methodical. It doesn't care about your feelings, your past, or your capacity for existential despair. What it does care about is efficiency. How fast you can swing, how hard you can block, how long you can endure without collapsing. The wooden sword you're handed each morning, called a rudis, is deliberately heavier than the real thing. This is supposed to build strength, which is a polite way of saying it gives you wrist pain and bone bruises before breakfast. You spend hours striking a wooden post known as the pullus, which represents a stationary opponent, the kind that doesn't stab back. You hit it again and again, repeating the same 5 basic movements until your muscles stop responding and your brain starts detaching for survival. Slash, parry, lunge, step, retreat. You do it until your technique becomes instinct, or until your arms give out and you get shouted at by an instructor who looks like he's personally murdered joy. And then comes sparring. It's technically practice, but it's also a socially acceptable outlet for the dozens of men in this compound to hit each other without consequences. You face off against another trainee, both armed with wooden weapons, under the watchful gaze of instructors who will correct your mistakes by demonstrating them with painful precision. Blocking too slow? That's a bruised rib. Footwork sloppy? That's a trip and a mouthful of gravel. You learn quickly that pain is a teacher here, one with very little patience. You're taught more than just how to fight. You're taught how to fight in style. The instructors emphasize flair, wide arcs, dramatic feints, well-timed grunts, not because it helps you survive, but because the crowd loves a show. This isn't a battlefield, it's a stage. And if your death is boring, the crowd might get restless. And when the crowd gets restless, the editor, the official in charge of the games, might decide to spice things up. That usually means introducing a lion, or 2. As the days grind on, the weapons become more varied. You're introduced to different gladiator styles, or armature, each with their own rules, armour and signature weapons. Maybe you're trained as a mumio, heavy armour, big shield, short sword, or a retiarius, net, trident, no armour, and a death wish. Maybe you're unlucky enough to be a secutor, with a helmet so smooth and rounded it makes you blind and deaf at the same time. Each type has its own tactics, its own pairings, and its own likelihood of survival. You don't get to choose. You're assigned whatever best suits your body type, fighting temperament, and the audience's appetite for novelty. Discipline in the ludus is strict. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't question orders. You don't show fear, at least not openly. There's a punishment scale for everything. Show up late? That's a flogging. Disobey a direct command? That's double training with your hands tied. Try to run? If you're lucky, you're dragged back for public humiliation. If you're not, you disappear quietly, and no one ever talks about you again. Even injuries aren't an excuse. A limp just means you train slower. A broken finger means you'll learn to grip differently. Pain isn't a problem here. It's part of the curriculum. The psychological reshaping is more subtle, but no less brutal. You begin to think in terms of us and them. Us is the gladiators, The ones who train, sweat, and bleed together. Them is everyone else, the lanista, the instructors, the guards, the audience that will one day cheer as your intestines spill out like a victory ribbon. You learn not to look too far into the future. Thinking beyond the next training session feels dangerous. Hope is rationed, if it's allowed at all. Occasionally someone breaks. A man refuses to pick up his sword. Another starts crying during drills and won't stop. These moments are brief and deeply uncomfortable. The instructors respond with a calculated mix of violence and indifference. You watch silent, knowing that empathy is a liability. There's no space for kindness here. Not because people are cruel, but because kindness in a place like this is like planting flowers in a war zone. Beautiful, short-lived, and entirely useless. You start to feel the changes in your body before you recognize them in your mind. Muscles thicken, movements sharpen. The bruises fade slower, but they fade. You learn to anticipate pain, to flinch in ways that don't look like flinching. Your instincts dull just enough to make you dangerous. And somewhere in all this, the fear doesn't vanish. It just becomes familiar, like background noise or the smell of old leather. You stop thinking about dying every day. You start thinking about how to die well. That's progress, apparently. One afternoon, during a particularly long sparring session, under a punishing sun, an instructor pauses beside you. He says something in Latin that you mostly don't understand, but you catch a word, spectaculum. Spectacle? That's what you are now. Not a fighter, not a man, a performance, a temporary distraction for people who'll never understand what it took for you to stay standing. The instructor smirks, slaps the back of your helmet, and moves on. And so, you keep training, day after day, until your knuckles crack, your knees grind, and your shoulders feel like they've been replaced with sandbags. You learn that survival isn't about strength, it's about rhythm, routine, a stubborn refusal to fall apart. You wake, you fight, you eat, you sleep. You repeat the cycle until you forget what it was like to live any other way. And in time, something inside you settles. Not peace exactly, but resignation. A dull acceptance that this is your life now. Not heroic, not tragic, just sweaty, painful, and deeply, thoroughly Roman. You eat better than a field slave, which is like saying you drown in slightly cleaner water. Your diet isn't luxurious, but it's abundant, a steady stream of barley, beans, lentils, and whatever fruit happens to be in season or rotting slightly slower than the rest. You don't get meat often. When you do, it's usually boiled to the point of indifference. But you do get carbs, so many carbs, enough to keep you heavy, padded, and slow to bleed out. That's the point. Gladiators are sometimes called hordeari, barley men, not because it sounds noble, but because it's accurate. You're being fed like livestock before slaughter, fattened not for flavour, but for drama. There's a strategy to it. Fat acts like armour. The crowds want to see you get hurt, but not too quickly. A gladiator who dies in the first 10 seconds is boring, a waste of ticket money and wine. But a big man with some padding, he can take a few hits, stagger a little, spray some blood theatrically before going down in a way that satisfies both the front row and the emperor's bored nephew. So you eat what you're given, chew dutifully, and try not to think about the fact that you're being physically curated for maximum visual impact. What you wear depends on what kind of fighter the lanista assigns you to be, and like everything else in your life now, you don't get to choose. If you're large and slow, they might put you in heavy armour and call you a mamillo. You'll get a crested helmet with a narrow eye slit, a tall rectangular shield, and a short stabbing sword called a gladius. If you're lean and quick, maybe you're a thraex, armed with a curved blade and a smaller shield designed to dart around and wear people down. If you're really unlucky, you're picked as a retiarius. No helmet, no armour, just a net, a trident, and the eternal hope that no one notices how exposed you are. Whatever your role, the armour is never comfortable. It's designed for spectacle, not ergonomics. The helmets are hot, heavy, and often limit your ability to see, breathe, or hear, which are, incidentally, 3 things you'll want to do in a fight. The metal digs into your shoulders, the straps chafe your skin, and the padding smells like every man who wore it before you. You learn to endure it, because complaining won't get it changed. It'll just get you noticed, and not in a good way. When you're not training, fighting, or bleeding, you're probably in your cell. Calling it housing would be generous. It's a stone box with a mat, a jug, and a bucket, and the knowledge that your continued presence in it is not guaranteed. The walls are carved with names, most of them short and crude, because no one expects to live long enough for poetry. At night, the air is thick and still, carrying the sounds of snoring, coughing, and men muttering prayers to gods who have long since stopped listening. You sleep in bursts, light and anxious, always halfway awake, always one noise away from panic. Hygiene is theoretical. There are baths, technically. Not hot and not often, but they exist. You strip down with everyone else, scrub with coarse sand, and try not to think about how many open wounds are sharing the same water basin. You don't bathe for freshness. You bathe so your cuts don't turn black. You learn to live with grime, under your fingernails, behind your ears, in the folds of your armour. You start to recognise people by smell before you see their face. It becomes background noise, like the ache in your joints or the sting of old blisters. Injuries are constant. Some are dramatic. A split lip, a cracked rib, a dislocated shoulder after a bad fall. Others are quieter. The nagging twinge in your knee, the dull ache in your back that never quite goes away. There's a medicus on site, which sounds impressive until you realise Roman medicine is a fascinating mix of guesswork, superstition, and whatever herbs happen to be nearby. If something needs stitching, it gets stitched, with bone needles and sinew. If it needs cauterizing, it gets burned. Infection is common. Tetanus is expected. Anesthetics are not part of the program. You don't get time off for injuries, you get adjustments, can't grip your sword, use the other hand, can't stand properly, train your upper body, can't fight at all. Then you're no longer useful, and you know exactly what happens to useless things in this place. So you push through the pain, strap on your armour, and keep showing up. You lie to the instructors, to the medics, to yourself. I'm fine becomes a reflex. Eventually, it starts to feel true, or at least close enough to survive on. Even the things that seem ordinary carry weight. Water is rationed. You get enough to stay hydrated, not enough to feel refreshed. Sleep is broken by nightmares and shouting. Sometimes yours, sometimes someone else's. You don't dream often anymore. When you do, it's usually of open fields, or walking barefoot on a dirt road that leads nowhere in particular. Sometimes you dream of food, not the barley and beans you eat every day, but roasted meat, honey cakes, olives soaked in oil. You wake up chewing air. If there's anything close to comfort, it's routine. You know what to expect each day, and there's a strange security in repetition. You know who you'll spar with. You know which guard is more likely to ignore minor rule breaking. You know which medicus wraps wounds tighter, and which one doesn't bother cleaning them first. You know how long you can go before the next blister turns into something worse. These tiny details become your world. You measure time in bruises. No one in Rome pretends this life is noble. That's the lie they sell to the crowd, the illusion of honour and glory. But you know better. This isn't about heroism. It's about survival, about becoming useful enough to stay alive, but not so visible that you draw attention. You are dressed to impress and fed to endure, and everything in your day is designed to prepare you for one thing: controlled, choreographed violence that will end eventually, with you on your back, staring up at the sun as it turns red through the blood in your eyes. You live like a beast, being conditioned for slaughter, not because you're dangerous, but because you're profitable. You are maintained, managed, and measured, not as a man, but as an investment. And if that doesn't bother you anymore, it's probably because they've trained that part out of you too. At some point, and it's hard to say exactly when, you stop being a man and start being a mascot. Not by choice, and certainly not with dignity, but with all the fanfare of a public spectacle Rome can't get enough of. You've survived enough training sessions, earned a few visible scars, and maybe landed a blow that impressed the wrong noble at the right moment. Now you're being groomed, but not for freedom. You're being polished up for public consumption. You're a gladiator now, in body, in function, and soon in brand. It starts with your name, not the one you were born with. That one vanished somewhere between the slave market and the Payless Post. No, this name is theatrical, dramatic, and about as subtle as a statue with a sword through its chest. Something like Tigris, Spiculus, Valens, or Aquila. Names that sound like you stepped out of a myth, not a cell. You don't pick it. The Lannister assigns it, usually after staring at you for a few seconds and deciding what kind of animal you vaguely resemble. If you're lucky, it's something fearsome. If not, you might end up named after a vegetable. The crowd won't care. They'll still scream it as you bleed. Then comes the gear. Gone are the mismatched scraps of practice armour and the shared helmets that smell like someone else's panic. Now you're fitted, not comfortably, but distinctively. Your helmet might have a crest, a plume, or a visor shaped like a demon. Your shield could bear a symbol, a boar, a lightning bolt, a snarling face. It's not for you. It's for them, the spectators who like their violence with a little flair. Your armour is designed less for protection and more for recognition. You're not just a fighter now. You're a silhouette, a brand. And like any good Roman spectacle, branding is everything. You're assigned a gladiator type, a specific class within this deadly little caste system. Maybe you're a Mamillo, with a big rectangular shield and a sword short enough to feel personal. Maybe you're a Thryax, with a curved blade and a helmet that looks like it was designed during a fever dream. If you've been truly cursed, you might be a Retiarius, a net fighter, armed with a trident and very little else, the closest thing Rome has to watching someone be mugged by a fisherman. Each type has its own fans, its own rivalries, and its own style. The crowd picks favourites the way gamblers pick horses, with money, passion, and almost no regard for what happens to you after the final blow. You notice the shift when people start watching you differently. Not just the trainers, but visitors to the ludus, nobles, merchants, politicians with too much money and not enough shame. They come to observe the stock, walk the training yard as if browsing at a particularly violent market. You're paraded, sometimes oiled up like a wax statue, sometimes asked to demonstrate a move or two, like a pet that knows a few tricks. Occasionally, someone takes a liking to you. You're offered gifts, or sponsorship, or worse, attention. Gladiator fame is a double-edged sword, and both edges are dull and rusty. On one hand, your name gets around. People talk about your fights. Maybe your image appears on pottery, or scratched into a tavern wall, or moulded into a cheap oil lamp, shaped like your head, and sold near the arena. Your likeness becomes a collectible. Your victories become someone else's bedtime story. But fame doesn't make you safer. It just raises expectations. The more the crowd loves you, the more they want to see you pushed to the brink. A good death, after all, makes the best legacy. And the fans, gods help you, the fans. Some send letters, some send food, some send less savoury offerings that arrive folded into tunics or carried by nervous boys with downcast eyes. You're an object of obsession now. Women write poems about your courage. Men carve your name into benches. Children reenact your battles with sticks and overactive imaginations. It would be flattering if it weren't so grotesque. These people don't know you. They know the version of you that bleeds well and dies with flair. That's the one they love. Sometimes, if you're favoured enough, you get invited to appear at a banquet. Not as a guest, as decoration. You stand in the corner like a very muscular vase, while senators toast to Rome and make jokes about how much blood you'll spill next week. You nod when spoken to, you accept whatever food or coin they throw your way, and you remember that while you may be famous, you are still property. Decorated, celebrated, and absolutely replaceable. The Lanista encourages the attention. Your fame is his profit. He negotiates appearance fees, arranges publicity fights, even sells miniature versions of your helmet to bored noblewomen with a taste for dangerous men. If you object, if you show even a flicker of pride or resistance, you'll be reminded calmly and firmly that the fame isn't yours. It belongs to the school, to the brand. You're the walking advertisement, the smiling corpse in waiting. You don't own your own myth. You hear stories about other gladiators, real legends, men like Spiculus, who was supposedly favoured by Emperor Nero himself, or Flamma, who won his freedom 4 times and refused it every time. You wonder if any of those stories are true, or just marketing inflated by years of retelling and selective memory. Either way, they serve a purpose, to make you believe there's something worth surviving for, that maybe if you fight well enough, you too can become a legend. Of course, no one ever tells you how those legends died, only that they did it spectacularly. The closer you get to your first real fight, the more you feel yourself harden. Not your body, that's already as hard as it needs to be, but your mind. You stop thinking of yourself as a person and start thinking of yourself as a role. You're not the man who wakes up sore and dreams of escape. You're the fighter with the flashy name, the sharp blade, and the good odds. You smile when they cheer. You pose when they shout. You feed them what they want. Because in Rome, you're not here to live. You're here to be seen. And the better you are at dying slowly and beautifully, the longer they'll let you play the part. The day before the games has a strange quiet weight to it. Not calm. Calm implies peace. This is something different. It's the stillness before a thunderstorm, when the air is too thick, the sky too silent, and everyone around you starts acting just a little too polite. Even the instructors are softer with their shouts, more measured with their blows. It's as if everyone understands, on some subconscious level, that tomorrow, some of you will be dead, and no one wants to be the last one to speak harshly to a dead man. You wake up early, as usual, but the routine has shifted. The morning training is lighter, more symbolic than strenuous. A few drills, a bit of stretching, some last-minute reminders on how to not embarrass your school in front of several thousand howling spectators. No one's trying to break you today. That part's already been done. This is polishing, sharpening, final inspection. Your body's been shaped. Now they're preparing the performance. You're taken to be bathed, not in a communal splash basin, but a proper cleansing, or at least the Roman version of it. A slave scrapes the sweat and dust from your skin with a curved metal tool called a strigil, which feels like being descaled. Then they pour oil over your back and shoulders, olive oil, warm and slick, rubbed in with practiced indifference. It's not for your comfort, it's for appearance. Oiled skin glistens in the sun. It catches the light when you move, shows off the muscle, exaggerates the sweat, makes your injuries shine like stage makeup. You're being prepped like livestock before a parade, clean enough to impress, glossy enough to sell. Your hair is trimmed, your nails are scraped, your armour is fitted, polished, and adjusted for spectacle. If you're wearing a crested helmet, the plume is fluffed and dyed. If your shield bears a symbol, a serpent, a wolf, a lightning bolt, someone takes a brush and repaints it for maximum contrast. Your weapon is checked, balanced, sharpened. Not the wooden practice sword you've grown accustomed to, but the real thing. Cold, heavy, and indifferent. You run your fingers along the edge, not to admire it, but to remind yourself that tomorrow, this is what separates survival from spectacle. At some point, you're told who you'll be facing. If it's someone from your own Lou Deuce, you probably already know him. Maybe you've trained together, eaten beside each other, shared a muttered joke about the quality of the lentils. That doesn't matter now. Friendship isn't part of the pairing system. The matchups are determined by the editor, the official in charge of organising the games, and are based on style, size, and how likely you are to make each other bleed in interesting ways. The editor doesn't care about your personal bonds. He cares about pacing, drama, balance, your chess pieces on a very loud, very bloody board. You may be evenly matched, a Mamillo against a Threx, for example, with just enough tactical contrast to keep the audience engaged. Or you might be pitted against someone entirely different, like a Retiarius with a net and trident, light and agile, darting around while you lumber under 50 pounds of bronze. The Romans love asymmetry. It builds tension, it gets people yelling, and it means your fate might come down, not to skill or strength, but to how amusing your death will look from the upper seats. The night before the fight is strangely ceremonial. There's a small meal, not lavish, but more than usual. Bread, beans, dried fruit, and sometimes wine, though never enough to make you forget what's coming. You eat surrounded by other gladiators, some silent, some trying to laugh, all of them pretending not to care. Conversation is cautious. No one wants to jinx it by saying too much. Everyone knows someone's not coming back tomorrow. The trick is pretending it isn't you. Some men pray to Jupiter, to Mars, to their ancestors, to anyone who might be listening. You see them kneel in corners, fingers knotted, heads bowed, whispering things they'd never admit in daylight. Even those who mock the gods hedge their bets on fight day. Others stay completely still, eyes vacant, minds clearly somewhere, far from the stone walls of the ludus. A few try to sleep early, as if resting now might make up for what's coming. You try to do the same, but it's difficult. Your body is calm, but your mind paces circles like a trapped animal. As the hours tick down, you become hyper-aware of your body. Every twitch, every ache, every bruise that might give someone an edge. You go over your moves again and again, mentally rehearsing every strike and block. You visualize the fight, imagining a dozen versions where you win. You try not to picture the ones where you don't. You try not to think about what your blood will look like in the sand, or whether the crowd will cheer when you fall, or whether you'll even hear it at all. Sometimes, if you've performed well enough in training or your name has started to circulate, a patron might send a gift, a token of support or luck or ownership, depending on their mood, a charm, a ring, a small carved idol of Hercules. Occasionally, a lock of hair from someone who thought your latest sparring match was romantic. You're not allowed to refuse these things. You nod, you smile, you pretend it matters. Because in a way it does, not to you, to your brand. Eventually, the torches are dimmed. The instructors leave. The guards pace slower. The ludus falls into a hush that feels heavier than silence. You lie on your mat, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths. You've trained for this. You've imagined it 1,000 times. But tomorrow, it will be real. The sand will be real. The blade will be real. And the cheers, the ones you've heard echoing from faraway arenas, will be for you, whether you win or lose or die in pieces. You might live, you might not. But either way, Rome expects a show, and you've been oiled up to deliver one. The roar hits you before the sun does. It pours over the walls of the Colosseum like a tidal wave. Thousands of voices layered together into one unbroken sound, rising and falling with the slow, hungry rhythm of expectation. It's not cheering exactly, not yet. It's the sound of people waiting to be entertained. And you are the opening act. You stand just inside the gate, shield resting against your leg, helmet tucked beneath your arm. Around you are the others, some silent, some whispering last-minute prayers, all of you sweating despite the early hour. The entrance tunnel is cool and shadowed, but you can already feel the heat radiating in from outside. It smells like dust and blood and anticipation. Somewhere far above, A trumpet blasts a few jagged notes into the air, and the gates begin to creak open. You step forward into sunlight so bright it feels like punishment. The arena floor, the harina, is a wide oval of packed sand, pale and coarse, meant to soak up blood without turning everything into mud. It's already stained in places, reddish-brown spots dotting the surface, like reminders of how this usually ends. The heat hits you in waves, bouncing up off the ground, caught in the gleam of your helmet and armour. Your sandals crunch against the sand as you walk to your mark. Every step rehearsed, every motion deliberate. You keep your eyes forward. Looking up at the crowd too soon makes it harder to breathe, but you can feel them. The Flavian amphitheatre, what most people will one day call the Colosseum, stretches up above you like a mountain made of marble and screaming. 50,000 seats, stacked in tiers occupied by a cross-section of humanity, unified only by a desire to watch other humans suffer. Senators in the lowest tier, reclining in togas and shade, merchants and soldiers in the middle rows, jostling for space, commoners and labourers in the highest seats, half blinded by the sun, shouting just as loudly as everyone else. Even the poorest Roman can get in. That's part of the charm. The games are for everyone, except, of course, the ones fighting in them. The opening ceremony is part theatre, part military parade, part religious ritual. You and the other gladiators stand in formation, lined up in pairs or groups, facing the podium where the editor sits, the man responsible for funding today's spectacle. Sometimes it's a magistrate hoping for re-election. Sometimes it's a bored nobleman spending his inheritance. If you're truly unfortunate, it's the emperor himself. Today, it's someone in purple, fat with wealth and flanked by guards. He nods without looking directly at you. You raise your right hand and salute with the words every gladiator knows. Ave Imperator morituri te salutant. Hail Emperor. We who are about to die salute you. It's not a promise, it's an offering. Then come the warm-up acts. Bestiari, beast fighters, are sent out to battle half-starved lions or spear leopards from behind wooden barricades. Sometimes there's a criminal, condemned to death in a more symbolic fashion, tied to a stake and mauled by a bear, or dressed as a mythological figure and fed to wolves in a scripted reenactment of some tragic epic. The crowd loves these. They laugh, they cheer, they chant the names of animals. It's all part of the pageantry, a slow boil before the main course. While that unfolds, you wait in the hypogeum, the underground complex beneath the arena floor, a warren of tunnels, cages and holding cells. The walls are damp. The air smells like old blood and animal waste. It's darker here, but no quieter. You hear the rumble of the crowd above. Feel the vibration through the stone. Your fellow fighters stand with you, armoured and silent, occasionally murmuring final thoughts to no one in particular. A few cross themselves, a few pace. One throws up into a corner and wipes his mouth without comment. When your turn comes, they lead you to the lift, a platform operated by a crew of slaves turning capstans, slowly raising you up to the arena floor through a hidden trapdoor. The light floods in again, sudden and blinding. The noise swells. You blink, steady yourself, and step into the open. The arena feels smaller from above. From within, it's massive. The sand stretches in all directions, marked by footprints, drag lines, and the occasional dark stain. The sun is directly overhead now, casting short shadows and baking your armour to the point of discomfort. Somewhere, a caged animal lets out a low guttural sound. A lion, or maybe a panther, restless for its cue. You grip your weapon tighter, not for courage, but for certainty. It's the only thing in this place you have any real claim to. When the match begins, it's announced by a trumpet and a voice that barely registers through the din. The crowd roars, not all at once, more like a wave, sweeping across the seats as people recognise the fighters remember the rumours, pick their favourites. Some chant your name, others boo. Most just shout instructions as if this were a sporting event and not a contest that might end with you bleeding out in front of their wine goblets. You focus on your opponent, nothing else matters now. But the noise seeps in anyway. It gets into your bones, into your skull, filling every space not occupied by fear or training. Every cheer feels like a drumbeat, every boo a crack of thunder. You begin to move, not because you've chosen to, but because standing still feels like drowning. You fight, not yet, not the real blows, but the circling, the testing, the coiling tension of predators sizing each other up. You try not to think about what it means, the spectacle, the heat, the eyes, but it presses in. You realise, with a strange kind of clarity, that you're not here to win. You're here to entertain. Whether you die or not is secondary. What matters is how long you last, how beautiful the struggle, how loud they cheer when you fall. The sun burns down, the noise climbs higher, and somewhere above, Rome watches with open mouths and closed hearts, ready to forget your name the moment your blood hits the sand. This is the arena, and you're finally in the middle of it. The thing they never tell you about gladiator combat is how strangely quiet it can be. Not the crowd, of course. They're a thunderstorm of noise and motion. But inside your helmet, behind the roar, there's this hollow space filled with breath, heartbeat, and the sharp metallic sound of your own blood rushing past your ears. It's like standing at the centre of a riot and realising that the only person who can save you is you. And even then, it's probably too late. When the match begins, it doesn't feel cinematic. There's no slow motion charge, no elegant choreography. It's clumsy, awkward, dangerous. You're not fighting on a stage, you're fighting in a sand pit that burns your feet and swallows your footing. Your shield is heavier than it should be. Your armour creaks with every step. And your opponent isn't a villain or a hero. He's just as tired, just as scared, and just as desperate to walk out of this alive as you are. The tactics depend on your type. If you're a Mamillo, you stay close, use your bulk, press forward like a battering ram with a short sword. If you're a Thraex, you stay nimble, aim low, and dart in and out before the big guys can corner you. If you're unlucky enough to be a Retiarius, you keep moving, always moving, tossing your net, jabbing with your trident, praying that the next man doesn't pin you before you can scramble away. Some fights are balanced, others are cruelly lopsided. You might be matched with someone twice your size just to amuse a bored senator who lost a bet on the last match. There are supposed to be rules, guidelines really, but they're flexible. Fights can be one-on-one, team battles, or mass skirmishes with multiple men stumbling through sand and sweat, trying not to accidentally kill their own side. Sometimes it's man versus beast, though rarely as clean or heroic as the stories suggest. A half-starved lion doesn't care about your armour class. It cares about the fact that you smell like blood and fear. If the editor wants a reenactment of a famous battle, you might be dressed up in a ridiculous costume and ordered to die at the appropriate dramatic moment. The real danger isn't always your opponent. It's the unpredictability, the uneven ground, the sun in your eyes, the sweat blinding you, the roar of the crowd masking the footstep behind you. One slip, one mistimed swing, one bad guess, and it's over. And when it's over, it ends fast. The blade doesn't pause for applause. It just buries itself in whatever flesh happens to be exposed. You remember your first real strike, not a practice blow, not a drill, but the first time your weapon actually connected with another man in a way that made him crumple. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like nausea. The sound was sickening. The resistance of flesh followed by the sudden, horrible give of something breaking inside. You froze, he screamed. The crowd roared. You were expected to follow up, to finish it, but all you could do was stare at the blood dripping from your blade like it had betrayed you. Eventually, you do finish it. You're not given much choice. Either your opponent dies or you do. And when it's done, when he's down and still and the sand is soaking up what's left of him, you stand there, heaving, blinking through sweat, waiting for judgment. The editor, perched in his box, decides whether your opponent lives or dies with a gesture. If he gives the signal for mercy, the man might be dragged off to fight another day. If not, you finish the job in front of a crowd that paid to see exactly that. The audience doesn't see individuals. They see characters, roles, archetypes bleeding for their amusement. They don't cheer for survival. They cheer for drama, for spectacle. They want to see emotion, rage, agony, triumph, anything to remind them that even as your organs spill into the sand, you were, briefly, alive in a way they'll never be. They don't remember names, they remember screams. What follows victory isn't celebration, it's collapse. You're pulled off the field, half carried, half dragged, your body bruised, sliced, and pulsing with pain in places you hadn't realised could hurt. Medics wait in the corridors, their hands already bloody from the last round. There's no comfort, no congratulations, just triage. Wounds are rinsed with vinegar that burns like fire, then packed, stitched, or cauterized depending on how much time they have before the next round. And sometimes there is a next round. If the crowd is especially bloodthirsty, or the schedule poorly paced, you may be sent back in the same day. That's the worst, not just because your body's barely holding together, but because now the fear is familiar. You know what's coming. The pain, the noise, the silence inside the helmet. It's somehow worse the second time. You can't rely on adrenaline anymore. You're already drained. The legends lie, they make it sound heroic, like gladiators went out swinging with defiant cries and noble gazes fixed on the horizon. But the truth is that most of you die messy, awkward deaths. You trip, you bleed out slowly, you scream, you clutch at wounds that won't clot. You die with your mouth open and your eyes full of dust. It's not glorious, it's just painful, and it's loud. So terribly loud. And if you survive, if by some miracle or accident you walk off that sand under your own power, you aren't relieved. You're exhausted. You're ashamed of what you had to do. You're aware down to the marrow that you will have to do it again. Surviving doesn't make you stronger. It just proves you can be dragged back into the ring a little while longer. Because this isn't a triumph, it's a process. And you are part of the machinery now, a component in Rome's most beloved form of cruelty. The screaming doesn't stop when the match ends. You just get used to it. Survival is overrated. That becomes painfully clear once the adrenaline fades, and your body starts to tally the damage. You're alive technically. You're not victorious. You're not triumphant. You're just not dead. And in the eyes of Rome, that means you're eligible to be patched up, repainted, and reissued for future bloodshed. Congratulations. You've earned a brief window of suffering before it all starts again. The medics aren't gentle, but they're fast. They've had practice. You're not the first man they've hauled into this little stone room, and you won't be the last. You're laid out on a bench, armour yanked off with no concern for the state of the body underneath. Blood is scrubbed away with rough cloth and vinegar, which burns so badly you almost forget the pain of the wound itself. Almost. If the cut is shallow, you're lucky. If it's deep, they start sewing. Not with silk or linen, but with catgut. Literal animal intestines dried and twisted into string. It's stiff, coarse, and designed to hold flesh together like a poorly stitched leather bag. There is no anaesthesia. Roman medicine doesn't do numbness. What they do offer is a wooden stick to bite down on, while the needle pushes through your skin and the thread drags through open muscle. You scream, but not loudly. You learn early on that screaming makes it worse. It draws attention. It marks you as weak. So instead you clench your jaw, stare at the ceiling, and count the passes of the needle, as if that might somehow make it stop. If the wound is worse, a broken bone, a crushed joint, or a limb too mangled to save, The solution is amputation. It's as crude as it sounds. A tourniquet, a saw, and a medic who's done this too many times to flinch. They heat the blade first if they have time, but often they don't. You hear the stories, men who lost arms below the elbow, legs above the knee, even fingers sliced away because they interfered with weapon grip. There's no prosthetic, no rehab. You're just marked unfit for combat and either sent to perform menial tasks or quietly discarded, depending on your remaining usefulness. But most wounds don't kill you right away. They linger. They fester. Infection is not a possibility, it's an expectation. No one in this era understands germs. Not really. Wounds are cleaned with wine, cauterized with hot iron, or packed with honey if someone's feeling experimental. Bandages are reused. Water is communal. You sleep in the same cell with a dozen other bleeding men, all coughing, limping, all groaning through the night. Fevers are common, so are swollen joints, blackened fingers, and the sour smell of something going wrong under a layer of linen. If you manage to avoid infection, you still don't heal cleanly. Scars pull your skin tight. Deep cuts turn into stiff raised ridges that restrict movement and ache in bad weather. Joints swell and never quite shrink again. A shoulder that got dislocated in a match now grinds every time you raise your arm. A broken toe means a permanent limp. The body doesn't forget what's been done to it. It just finds new ways to remind you. And there's no such thing as off-duty. You don't get medical leave. You get lighter training. You're still expected to report each day, bandaged or not, and go through motions that were designed for men with functioning limbs and whole rib cages. If you can't fight, you clean. If you can't clean, you carry. If you can't carry, you serve as a sparring dummy for someone else's drills. The lanista doesn't care how you feel. He cares whether you're earning your keep. And a man who does nothing is a man wasting space. The worst part is the fatigue, not the kind you sleep off, but the kind that settles in your bones and never quite leaves. You wake up tired, you eat while tired, you train while tired. Your muscles ache before you move, and your skin feels too tight over bruises that never fully fade. Every stare, every push-up, every swing of the sword feels heavier than the day before. You don't recover. You just deteriorate at a slightly slower pace. Pain becomes background noise, a dull hum behind your thoughts. You stop registering new injuries unless they interfere with basic function. A split lip? Fine. A cracked rib? Work around it. Blisters turn to calluses. Torn skin becomes scar tissue. The medics joke that you're becoming more leather than man, but it's not really a joke. Some mornings you stretch and wonder if anything inside you is still original. Sleep doesn't help. It's shallow and filled with twitching. Nightmares are frequent, often indistinguishable from memory. You relive the fights, the ones you won, the ones you barely crawled out of. You wake up clenching your fists or gasping like you've been drowning. Some nights you hear others cry out in their sleep. You don't ask questions. You don't offer comfort. Everyone's got their own ghosts, and you're all just trying to make it through the next round without adding to the collection. You start to see the long-term injuries in others before you recognize them in yourself. The way one man's left arm never straightens. The limp another tries to hide. The one who can't hold a sword for more than 10 minutes without shaking. These are not the old men of the ludus. These are fighters in their 20s, already worn down like rusted tools. You begin to realize that there's no such thing as growing old in this profession, only wearing out. Sometimes you hear whispers of gladiators who earned their freedom, but still walk with a hunch, or who can't turn their neck anymore, or who drink themselves to sleep because their backs won't let them lie still. These aren't horror stories. They're cautionary tales, warnings delivered in quiet voices around shared meals. You pretend not to listen, but you do. You always do. You're still breathing. That's something. Not much, but something. You've been stitched, wrapped, rinsed in wine, and declared combat-worthy by a man who last washed his hands in 10 BCE. And soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, you'll be back in the arena, holding a sword in fingers that barely close, smiling for a crowd that doesn't care how much it hurt to stand up that morning. You're not fine. You're just not dead yet. And that's all Rome asks of you. Eventually, you stop surviving matches and start winning them. There's a difference. Survival is passive. Luck, positioning, a good medic. Winning is deliberate. It means your opponent went down and you didn't. It means the crowd roared, the editor smiled, and the sand was painted with someone else's blood. You stand tall while someone else is dragged away. And if you do that enough times, you earn something rare in this world. Attention. It starts small. A few extra cheers. A name whispered in the crowd before a match begins. Someone scrawls it on a tavern wall in charcoal. Probably spelled wrong. A vendor near the arena starts selling little trinkets shaped like your helmet. Some rich matron sends a servant to deliver a ribbon soaked in perfume and bad decisions. You've become what every gladiator secretly fears and secretly desires. Marketable. With recognition comes expectation. The editor starts scheduling you later in the day, closer to the headline acts. You're matched with harder opponents, given trickier weapons, told to put on a real show. The crowd doesn't just want to see you fight, they want to see you perform. Your victories are supposed to be memorable now, not just efficient but theatrical. That's the Roman way. Bread, circuses, and blood with a flourish. You begin to understand why some gladiators burn out faster once they gain fame. The pressure rises. The match fixing begins. Sometimes you're told exactly what to do, when to fall, how to draw it out, how to make it look good. If you're lucky, the other fighter has also been briefed, and you both play your parts. If you're not, someone forgets their cue and ends up dead by accident. The crowd doesn't always know the difference. Sometimes they do, and they love it even more. Behind the scenes there are deals, bets placed, outcomes negotiated. Your lanista negotiates your worth like a man selling livestock that's learned to dance. You're offered higher rates for special fights, sponsorships from senators who want to be associated with winners, and appearances at public feasts where you're expected to stand there, armoured and smiling, while drunk aristocrats tell you how they could have taken that last guy if they were 30 years younger and less busy. The privileges, if you can call them that, are laughably grim. You get slightly better food, a new tunic that doesn't smell like 10 other men wore it first, a private cell if your lanista wants to keep you from being injured during late-night brawls with jealous rivals. Maybe you're allowed to keep some of your winnings, a few denarii tossed at your feet like bones to a well-behaved dog. You don't own your life, but you're allowed to decorate the cage a little. You're invited to more banquets, not to dine, but to be displayed. You stand beside fountains while the wealthy feed each other, grapes, and praise your recent kill as if it were a piece of art. Some ask you questions. What's it like to kill a man? Do you enjoy it? What does the blood feel like on your hands? You're expected to answer with charm, stoicism, a little mystery. The truth, that you mostly feel numb and vaguely hungry, doesn't photograph well in conversation. If you're especially popular, the pressure becomes suffocating. You're given a nickname by the crowd. They paint it on signs, shout it from balconies, chant it as you enter the arena. At first it feels powerful, then it starts to feel like a mask you can't remove. You're not yourself anymore. You're the character. You're the myth. And myths don't get to be tired. They don't get to hesitate. They certainly don't get to lose. Losing, when it finally happens, is not met with sympathy. The same crowd that cheered your rise will boo your stumble. You were supposed to win. You were supposed to bleed just the right amount, and then stand over the fallen man like a marble statue brought to life. If you fail, if you disappoint, the response is cold. They turn on you like a dog that forgot its tricks. The editor shrugs, the lanista sighs, and suddenly, your name isn't being painted anymore. It's being scraped off walls. You notice the shift in how people talk to you. The medics are less attentive. The instructors stop pretending you're different. You're scheduled more frequently now, less as a prize and more as a test for the next up-and-comer. You're the stepping stone, the experienced opponent who makes the new guy look good before they get their turn in the spotlight. It's humiliating, but you can't complain. You're still here, and that's more than most can say. The truth is, it doesn't matter how many victories you string together. You're still a slave, a possession. You might be the most celebrated name in the Ludus, but you're still listed on an inventory sheet. Your equipment is worth more than your life. If you die, the Lanista will sell your armor, recruit someone new, and recycle your name, if it was catchy enough. Fame doesn't buy you freedom. It just raises your resale value. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of yourself in polished bronze, your helmet under your arm, your face weathered, your eyes hard. You look like someone else, someone famous, someone strong. And for a brief moment, you almost believe the lie, that you're winning, that this matters, that there's a future somewhere beyond the next arena floor. But the next day, the trumpet sounds, the gates open, and the sun hits you like judgment all over again. You step forward. Because that's what you do. Because in Rome, even success still bleeds. They call it a reward, a symbol of honor, triumph, and earned release. A small wooden sword, no sharper than a spoon, handed to you in front of a roaring crowd. The Rudis, that's the name. A ceremonial weapon that signifies your freedom. You fought enough, bled enough, killed enough, and now the editors, the Lanista, and the howling masses have decided you've earned the right to stop, to walk away, to live. That's the idea anyway. The moment itself is theatrical. You kneel, head bowed, helmet under your arm. The editor announces your discharge. A slave places the Rudis into your hand like it's the keys to a kingdom, and the crowd erupts into cheers. The sound is overwhelming, almost blinding, and for a second, just a second, you believe in it. You believe that something has ended, that you've closed the door on the worst part of your life and stepped through into something better. But the arena doesn't give closure. It only gives exits, and they're rarely clean. You leave the Ludus the next day. There's no ceremony, no escort, just a satchel with your meager possessions and the knowledge that you're no longer owned, which is not the same thing as being wanted. You walk out with a limp, a shoulder that doesn't rotate, and a jaw that clicks every time you chew. You're a free man. But Rome doesn't exactly roll out the red carpet for former killers. The Rudis may say you're a citizen now, or close enough to count, but it doesn't come with a pension or land, or the ability to stand upright without pain. You're not entitled to property. You're not granted a job. You're certainly not respected. You're a novelty, maybe. Something to be gawked at in a tavern, or hired for private brawls at some bored aristocrat's dinner party. But more often than not, you're just another ragged figure limping through the marketplace, trying to barter old scars for new bread. People expect more from you. They expect you to be proud, grateful. They speak about your freedom as if it were a gift, not something extracted from your flesh over a decade of violence. They call you lucky, a survivor. But you don't feel lucky. You feel displaced, removed from the only system you knew how to navigate. You're not fit for soldiering. You're too old and too slow for labor. You're too bruised to blend in, and too famous to be left alone. There are other retired gladiators, of course. You find them here and there, clustered in dark corners of Rome, telling the same stories to different audiences. Some are missing fingers, others walk with canes. A few have missing eyes, mangled ears, teeth that rattle when they speak. They reminisce in a way that borders on delusion, not because they enjoyed the arena, but because it's the only time in their lives when they were anything more than disposable. When people chanted their names and meant it, when their pain had context, some of them turned to training. They returned to the Ludus, not as fighters, but as instructors. It's the only place where their broken bodies still hold value. Others open taverns or take guard jobs, assuming their joints still allow for it. A few try to disappear into the countryside, only to find that the peace they were promised doesn't exist. It's hard to feel peace when your body still wakes up in fight mode, and your dreams are full of sand and screaming. The trauma doesn't fade. The arena stays with you. Every noise sounds like a cheer. Every shadow looks like a threat. You startle at sudden movement. You flinch when someone raises a hand too quickly. Your sleep is shallow, interrupted by visions of men you killed and ones you couldn't. You find yourself reacting to things before your brain catches up. Ducking, twisting, stepping aside. Habits built over years don't evaporate. They calcify. Money runs out quickly. Whatever coins you were allowed to keep vanish into food, lodging, and bribes. If you're lucky, someone wealthy still remembers you fondly. A former sponsor, a patron who once bet on you and won big. They might toss you a few sesterces now and then, in exchange for a story or a moment of recognition they can use at dinner parties. You smile, nod, thank them. But it's not respect, it's charity dressed in nostalgia. You hear rumours of gladiators who turned their rudies into a weapon again, not in the arena, but on the streets. Mercenaries, bodyguards, thugs for hire. Some even re-enlist voluntarily, selling themselves back to the games because death in the arena felt more honest than slow decay outside of it. You understand the impulse. Out there, you're a broken man. In the arena, at least, you are someone. And yet, you carry the rudies. You don't throw it away. It's not a weapon, not really, but it's proof that you survived, that you mattered once. It's small, smooth, lighter than it looks. Some men mount it on their wall. Others sleep with it under their bed, like a talisman. You keep yours wrapped in cloth, tucked into your satchel, a reminder of what it costs to earn something Rome considers an honour, and you know to be a wound shaped like freedom. Sometimes children ask you about it. The wooden sword, the scars, the fights. They see you as a legend, a living relic of the arena, one of the few who made it out. They ask if you were brave, if you were strong, if you were famous. You lie to them. You tell them you were lucky. You don't tell them about the pain, or the poverty, or the nightmares. You don't tell them that freedom feels a lot like exile when you've got no place left to go. You won the right to walk away, but no one tells you what to do after the walking stops. And no one warns you that outside the arena, no one is cheering anymore. Eventually, you die. That's the one constant. Whether it's on the sand, in the gutter, or in a narrow bed after too many years of aching joints and sleepless nights, the ending is always the same. There's no retirement villa, no parade. No one writes poetry about a gladiator who dies quietly. If you're absurdly lucky, it's painless. More likely, it's not. You bleed or cough or stiffen in your sleep, and then it's over. If you die in the arena, which most do, there's a brief moment of ceremony, but only because the crowd demands it. They cheer as you fall. Maybe the editor gives a final signal. Thumb turned, palm out. Whatever interpretation of the gesture is fashionable that season. If you're granted mercy and still die later from your injuries, that doesn't count as execution. It just means the paperwork is messier. Once your chest stops moving, you're rolled onto a stretcher and carted away before the next match. The blood is raked smooth. The next gladiator steps out. No one in the crowd is still thinking about you by the time his blade leaves the scabbard. Your body is either burned or buried, depending on the resources available and whether anyone cared enough to claim you. If you were part of a larger school, your collegium, the sort of guild for gladiators, might pay for your cremation. A small ceremony, a bit of incense, and a wooden marker if you're lucky. If you were favoured, your name might be scratched into stone. Something like Marcus Mamillo, fought 14 times, died with honour. Sounds grand, but it's a formula. The same inscription gets used dozens of times, with different names and numbers. You become a tally, a pattern. Sometimes your gear is passed on. not as inheritance, but as inventory. Your helmet, your greaves, your shield, they're cleaned, repainted, and handed to the next recruit who happens to fit the measurements. The armour remembers you better than the men who trained beside you. Someone else wears your crest, your name, even your fighting style. The crowd might not even notice you're gone. If they do, they'll think of you fondly for about 10 seconds before moving on to the next bloodshed. The sand forgets faster, blood dries, stains fade, the arena keeps moving. The games resume. Rome doesn't pause for the dead. It swallows them and keeps cheering. You are spectacle, not substance, a fleeting distraction in a city built on noise and appetite. And appetite always returns. They'll chant another name tomorrow. The same rhythm, the same thunder, just a different corpse beneath it. If you die outside the arena, it's lonelier. Maybe it happens in a cramped room you rented with the last of your coin. Maybe it's in an alley behind a bathhouse, your ribs aching from whatever disease finally claimed you. There's no fanfare, no funeral, no tomb. Someone drags your body away and dumps it in a pit with others who lacked the money or influence for proper burial. You go into the ground with strangers. The worms don't care how many matches you won. You think about legacy, but not often. You know better. Rome doesn't remember people. It remembers performances. A few gladiators make it into stone. The famous ones, the favourites. Their names are etched into plaques. Their faces carved into crude reliefs. But even those fade. Weather wears the inscriptions down to smooth lines. The plaques are reused. The statues are stolen. Eventually, some historian will misrecord the number of fights you survived or mix you up with someone else entirely. You'll become trivia, a footnote, if you're lucky. And the crowds, the people who screamed your name, who watched you bleed and clapped when you killed, they don't mourn. They reminisce. Maybe a few of them say you were the best, that no one fought quite like you. But they don't mean it. They're already invested in the next face, the next myth, the next swing of the sword. You were never a person to them, just a moment of entertainment. A voice in a roar. You remember one of the older gladiators, missing an eye, mostly deaf, who used to mutter that the arena teaches you one thing above all. You are replaceable. When he finally died, the school didn't announce it. His name was removed from the roster. That was it. You asked about him once, and the instructor just shrugged. He was old. That was his eulogy. That's what Rome offers its champions. So you imagine your own ending, not because it comforts you, but because it gives you something to prepare for. You picture the sand, the crowd, the sun in your eyes one last time. You picture the final blow. Maybe clean, maybe messy, maybe delivered by someone who doesn't even know your name. You wonder how long your blood will stay visible before the rakes clear it away. You wonder if anyone will say your name out loud after the gate closes behind your body. The truth is, it doesn't matter. You've spent your life bleeding for people who'll never thank you, who can't even agree on the signal for mercy. Your pain was applause. Your legacy is dust. But for a little while, you stood in the centre of Rome's greatest stage. You endured, you fought, you mattered, even if only as a flash of violence in a very loud empire. And then, like everything else in Rome, you disappeared. That's the end of tonight's blood-soaked stroll through the life and inevitable death of a Roman gladiator. Thanks for stepping into the arena with me, bruises and all. If you're still awake, go ahead and like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what part would have broken you first. The bone-deep fatigue, the catgut stitches, or the crowd cheering while you bled. Sleep well, champion. You survived longer than most.